As I mentioned, undefeated, 7-0, have yet to lose a game in the history of the franchise. I believe it's a 4-year history of the Mustangs. They have not ever lost. To the best of my knowledge, I don't believe they've ever even dropped a point. But winning streaks are fleeting, and the Yorkton Bulldogs this year may be touted as the one team that could be able to offer the Moose Jaw Mustangs a challenge.
I don't offhand, but I think it was 7 years, say roughly 8 to 10 games. So if I had to ballpark figure, I'd say 65-0 before they actually got a loss.
I'm not sure. I know the one season it was they went undefeated, and except for one game in the playoffs, in the final against Saskatoon, because I was playing in that game.
I'm not entirely sure. Barry Stewart would know for sure, but we had one loss in 2002, 2003 playoffs, I think, to Yorkton, and that was in the 3-game final series, and that was our only provincial loss.
You know what? I didn't remember offhand. Some people do, some of my teammates and others. I think it's 30, but I had to look that up, and I think I might even be wrong now that I think again. But it was a lot, and there's a couple of streaks when we talk about that. There's the longest winning streak, so without a loss or a tie, and then of course there's the one without a loss, so including ties. The start of it was when our first game, April 24th, 2002, and ran to the second game we played against Yorkton. And it is the only score sheet I still don't have. I have every score sheet in every game, PGLL game I've been in, except for that one. I don't know why I don't have it. I think there was some penalties in that were on there. So it would be mid-August of 2004. And that was a total of 32 wins in a row with no losses. That was 42 games without a loss. As far as the longest winning streak, that would be May 2nd, 2003, and ended August, again, same date. And that was 32 wins in a row. It's an accomplishment. Even when it was happening, I tried not to be too caught up in the winning streak, because even being a young lacrosse player, I kind of knew that being on a long winning streak in Saskatchewan was great, but there's always kind of the next level that I think our sport in the province had to get to. So all it would take is just a trip to Founders Cup to realize that being dominant in Saskatchewan didn't necessarily mean you dominate elsewhere. But it was definitely a fun run that we had. Our overall record was 62-2-2 over that time.
I believe Brad will get the goal as he picked up the loose ball in the left corner, worked out to the left point, and took a shot back against the grain there. Baptiste looked a little bit caught off guard with that goal.
So Moose Jaw kind of started with these kids younger and really had just a strong group of athletes in about a 2 or 3 year time frame, and they dominated the whole way up, for sure. And that started in box lacrosse, but then they picked up field lacrosse again when there was teams to play, and it didn't take more than a couple of years for them to start really being extremely competitive in that respect. And just some amazing athletes. I mean, there's no doubt about it. Some of the names are probably in the history book still in PGL, like David Mitchell and Ken Stewart, and they just had such a strong group of players there and leaders. Tanner Kittler was a couple of years later, but Jared Doherty, and just they kind of had it all. They had the skill, they had the size, they had the leaders, they really had a full-rounded team, and it was just those battles against where Yorkton had a very similar. It was kind of opposite because they came from the field lacrosse, but they had the same. They had the size, they had the skill, they had the leadership. And when those teams went to head-to-head, whether it was in box lacrosse or field lacrosse, they were great battles. And I'd say Sturgis, which was Yorkton, the majority of the Yorkton players were Sturgis. They still kind of ended up winning right through field lacrosse provincials, at least until some of those veterans passed the age. And Moose Jaw had that little bit of advantage then on the box lacrosse side because that's where their experience lied. But when they whether they met on the box or the field, it was great to see those battles. So.
The dynamics underpinning the Mustangs' success, I mean, it came from several areas. I think first and foremost was a group of highly skilled athletes with a love and desire for the game of lacrosse and each other. I mean, they grew up in a fairly small community here. I'd say we're very similar in that way to Sturgis. And there's a reason Sturgis won all those field championships throughout the years. The guys were just really close, whether they were playing against each other in hockey or together. We had a group, the first guys that started out with me in '96, way back when we were in Pee Wee. And they were affectionately called the Core. And I include players like David Mitchell, my son Ken, Jared Doherty, Tyson Hoover, Brad Wilk, Derek Burns. I mean, some of these guys went on to play, junior A and BC, and of course David went on to play pro and at Worlds for the Canadian junior team. And the core players, the younger players looked up to them. They grew up watching these guys win provincial championships year in, year out. So they were really looked up to by the younger players. One interesting thing we did with the core is they knew in a tough situation, games on the line, and my younger players knew it too, that they were going to be on the court. But they also knew that if we were up substantially in the game, or at nationals, if we were getting our butts kicked, that those players would sit, and then the younger players would get a lot more court time. There was never anything about looking at personal stats and whatnot. It was a team first concept. There was just a mutual respect, younger, older, and as players came in through the system. Interestingly enough, I shared this with Chris a little while ago, is I've never cut a player from my team, any team I've ever had. I've never had to cut it. We just had enough players, and that's it, which is sometimes we had to bring up midget players. So I would say the core was instrumental. That group just understood what it took to be champions.
Well, I think partially because we stuck together for so long. I mean, we came up right from when we were 13, 14 years old, so stuck together all through the years and just kept playing. We had kind of a core in us that we just all knew what each other was going to do.
Yeah, I mean, in Moose Jaw, we had just a really good core group of guys, and mostly it was crossover from the hockey world. So in the wintertime, we'd play together, on ice in the rinks and play hockey. And then as soon as the late spring, kind of early summer hit, we would start playing lacrosse. So we kind of had this just year-round chemistry, a lot of the same guys all the way from, I'd say most of us 5th or 6th grade up until we hit juniors. So great friends and great teammates all along the way.
I think what made the Mustangs so good back in the day is they actually had a group of guys that played together for, I think ever since they were, 8, 9 years old. They developed up through the rankings. They just knew where every player was on the court. Obviously, they're physical, they had the size, the ball skills. They were just dominant, goalie, defense, forward. And then obviously Barry on the bench, just having that extra piece of knowledge there to help them out whenever they needed. But yeah, I think they played so long together so well that they honestly didn't even have to practice anymore. They just knew where everybody would be on the floor. And I think that's ultimately what separated them from, being really good to being exceptionally good.
I was fortunate to play both against the Mustangs and with the Mustangs, growing up and playing in the PGL. When it was a single tier of teams in the league, I played against them. They had great coaching. Barry, really knew what he was doing, understood the game, understood his players, and they had some really good athletes, which always helps. And I know how hard a lot of those players worked and how much time they spent working on their skills.
Well, I can tell you there was a lot of strong bodies. I mean, still one of my favorites was always Kenny. I mean, it didn't matter. The guy won every single draw he ever took. It was without a doubt. He was one of the strongest parts of that team. And when you retain the ball off the draw basically every time, it's tough to get away from it. All those guys, the Mustangs, that all played together for years, and they had a group of guys that were solid players, weren't going to back down from anybody. They had no fear of anybody. They knew they were going to win, always were going to win. You got guys like David Mitchell that were on that team that could basically score a goal as soon as he crossed the halfway point. You had to put pressure on him, to guys like Derek Burns that would come in there, cause all kinds of ruckus, distract your players, do all kinds of stuff. So they were a well-rounded team, great goaltending, great everything. And, having the intensity of having Barry on the bench and, driving those guys, and had been part of their lives and, worked with them in lacrosse for so many years. They were built to succeed, and they had the talent to do it, without a doubt. So it was exciting to play against them. And, there isn't a game that there wasn't, that I wasn't a part of with Moose Jaw that you could say wasn't exciting, from the second the ball got blown into the end of the buzzer. So
when I went to a two-tier league, I was fortunate enough to get called up to play with them, and that's Barry really spent a lot of time organizing that crew and coaching them. And, they were great practices. There was the knowledge of the game and the skill of the game. And, it was also a great group of guys that really got along well, had a lot of fun, both on the floor and off the floor. And so I think you put all of that together, it really, created a dynamic that allowed for success on the field or on the floor.
Ball is knocked to center. Returning back after it is Chris Lysenko. 23 on the two-man advantage, also 23 on the shot clock as Lysenko has it up top. Fakes over the shoulder pass for Beatty. Good job to control it. Beatty down low, a shot stopped by Andration. The centering pass, nice job by Chris Lysenko to pick it off, and he quickly brings the power play back the other way. 1:35 to go in it, over for Adam Stewart. Pass down low, a shot, and a goal! Great passing play there by the Yorkton Bulldogs, and it's 4-3.
Yeah, again, those guys have been playing, like, I still remember the first field lacrosse provincial we went to in Regina. Box team knew nothing about the game of field, and we come up against Sturgis, and it was like, I don't even know if we got a goal, and our goalie has box equipment on and whatnot. So we learned a lot that first year. We finally won an intermediate, what was it, U16 back then, or U15 up in Yorkton. And then, like I said, in 2002, we finally won that one. But they would have been a lot different team if they'd grown up playing the box game.
Yeah, it was good. Definitely, it was a good feeling to, we were in a neutral barn. I believe it was Emerald Park, and to come in there to win. And I believe we had a short bench, so Yeah, it's just kind of one of those things. Eventually, winning streaks do come in an end, and we were just the team to do it to the Mustangs.
Yeah, well, I mean, Lysenko and Keller and Beatty and Bazanski and Stewart, like they all played for York, and we had seen them lots through field, so it wasn't like we were blowing them out of the water before. They were always good games, but yeah, kind of the whole time the game was going on, we all just assumed we were going to come back and win it, right? But she just didn't pan out that night for us.
You know what? It's kind of hazy at this point. Some people took it harder than others. In the moment, I think upset because we just didn't play that good of a game. So it was frustrating that, we let the streak die. Just, at the time I probably thought it was lack of effort or lack of caring, but it just, stuff like that happens. Teams have off games. But pretty quickly I got over it. I tried to look at the positive side, which is, it's probably the sign of a healthy league that one team doesn't dominate and actually can lose. And so I think that was the key takeaway for me after the initial sting of it kind of wore off.
But they were a hell of a team. Great guys in that team. I mean, Lysenko, Bazanski, the Stewart brothers. And again, it was Warren Court, but after the game, assuming that the players were old enough, they would go for a beer or, get together and shoot the breeze. So a lot of respect between those two teams. So the loss, everybody wants to be perfect, right? And it's like the saying's often you practice to be perfect, but I don't agree with that statement. I think you practice to be the very best you can be, knowing you can never attain perfection. So, but you still strive for it, right? But I didn't mind losing them. They were a great team, great players, and just great personalities on that team too.
Yeah, we had one win against them, I'm gonna say in year 4, I think. Year 4, year 5, when we had some of our older kids were at that 18 and 19-year-old point. I think is the only time we ever beat them. And I'd have to look back in the papers to confirm all that. So I don't know for sure. I mean, Barry might remember better than me on that one, but I know that there was one victory, and that was before all the guys were starting to leave.
Whatnot. We actually lost our last league game against Saskatoon. Randy finally beat us, and didn't want to lose, but I couldn't be happier for that team. They had been close to us a few times. A lot of games were close, but they'd just never been able to beat us. So that one, neither of those losses ever bothered me.
Later on, basically 2005, a lot of our guys had already started to, our top players all started to go play, Junior B, Tier 1, and Junior A ball around the country. So we were losing a lot of players, as we continued to go on. And I think Moose Jaw was from 2001 to 2006. They held the title. So, or was it 2002? 2002, I think, is when they took over.
He sends across. That pass almost skips away from Bazanski, gets it back. Bazanski cuts to the middle.
Two players stood out was David Mitchell and Kenny Stewart, but they had a roster of superstars. You put any other player on any other team and they would be their best player. Tyson Hoover, Derek Burns, Jared Dowdy. The list can go on. And they just, they were just exceptionally good. There's no ways around it. And the other thing that I do remember about the Mustangs is we actually did give them their first loss in, I think, 7 years. So that was a pretty good feeling to do. But at the end of the day, they still won the championship, so that didn't really mean it much.
I would say there was a lot of players that you had to respect a lot. I don't know if I want to name names, but just there was a lot of just good athletes out there. And there was a lot of fierce competitors out there. And, lacrosse it's a rough sport. And, a lot of times it's about intimidation. And yeah, if you could kind of out intimidate your opponent, you had an upper hand. And different teams had different personalities too. I remember Yorkton was a collection of stars in a way, like a lot of just really unique talents kind of in their own right. Mainly field players that transitioned to box, but they were big physical guys, but then there's also some speedy guys, so they were just, you remembered kind of each player. But then I remember playing Saskatoon, and Saskatoon kind of had their own developmental program going on, and they seemed to be just almost army-like. Like everybody kind of seemed like they're the same size somehow. Like there are a few players that stood out for sure, but they were just very I'd say regimented, and they played a very upbeat style, and so yeah, each kind of program ended up having their own personality, and you kind of knew what to expect. And then there were some it was great to see some of these other communities come up with programs. And I mean, you'd see just, good athletes out there learning how to play kind of as the game went on, which, lacrosse is not the easiest game just to go out and try and play. But yeah, it was a very diverse league for sure, especially in the early years.
So the first game we played against Moose Jaw is one that I'll never forget. I know the one coach that we had promised that if we beat Moose Jaw, and everybody knows Moose Jaw is the top team in the league, our coach promised he'd shave his head off after the game. He brought clippers and everything. He was ready to do it. And I think, Moose Jaw came in. They probably weren't expecting us, being a new team, to give them, that much of a fight. And I think we had them. We were down 1-0 after the first period. And I don't know if they really expected us to come at them as hard as we did. We came out very aggressive, probably way more aggressive than most teams ever play the game. But I mean, we knew we had I think it was 1-1 after the first period. And the reason I say that is because I'm pretty sure I scored. But it was, we knew we didn't have the skill level to compete. And our game plan was, well, if we don't have the skill, let's not give them the opportunity to use their skill. They ended up, catching on and taking advantage of our over aggressiveness later on in the game and into the second and third period. But our coach was nervous after the first period when we come in and tied 1-1.
Well, the two Founders Cups we went to, for sure. I mean, those were kind of the highlights, as well as the old Canada Day tournaments, even when we were younger in Bantam. And that Founders was a real eye opener for us. I think we could have done a whole lot more damage if we would have been able to know the game a little bit better.
Again, I'll go back to the 03 championship overtime against the Smash and the 3-game series in New York. Now, those are my two highlights, I think. I mean, we went to Founders a couple times. Founders is tough. It's a very steep learning curve. I've always said, by the end of the tournament, we were beating teams that finished, second and third in the tournament. And the one year down in Laura, we were actually beating the end up gold medalists until the coach got very irate and yelled to the officials that they would never officiate an Ontario game again. And the whistles went away at that point, and they were a big, tough team. So no excuses. They were a better team overall for sure. But I think, you give any of these teams out of Saskatchewan, a month playing those elite level teams, either in Alberta, BC, or Ontario, and we would have been competing for gold medals, I think. But it's too early losses to teams like Manitoba. We just weren't ready for that level of intensity. So I'll leave it at that.
I think what I remember most is how we came back together for it. In a way, we, like I said, we were all hockey players, and we had a lot of really good hockey players that, when you're in late high school, 11th, 12th grade, and you graduate high school, a lot of guys go away and play junior hockey, and they really make a commitment to hockey, and that's great. But some of the focus that was put on hockey took away from lacrosse, and so. I think 12th grade, maybe even the first year junior, I don't even think Moose Jaw had a junior team because we lost too many players. But it was nice to see eventually guys came back. Something that they got maybe injured, or they just knew maybe that hockey wasn't for them anymore. And so they came back to Moose Jaw. And I think everybody kind of enjoyed almost a renaissance in lacrosse together. And we had fun, we hung out together, and then we also played lacrosse together and went on this just really great run. It was fun, we had success. So yeah, it was kind of, for a lot of us, it was the last kind of major kind of sporting accomplishment there was, and we were able to do it kind of with old buddies, so it was good.
Let's see. I guess when I was, I wore a lot of hats when I was in Moose Jaw. One of them was I was president of the Moose Jaw lacrosse for quite a few years, and we developed a philosophy. We had good meetings. Parents were involved. I involved players early on too. We involved officials, and one of the things we always said was, what we ended up calling it was developing a program of excellence. And that's something we implemented from our grassroots all the way up to our junior team. And excellent draws good players. In fact, in 2004, our already very good team was approached by a couple of the best players in the province out of Regina, Conrad Pierce and Luke Blondeau, and wanted to play with us. So we talked amongst the guys, and absolutely, we knew that the Smash were going to be really strong that year, and the Bulldogs. So yeah, we invited them with open arms, and again, they were difference makers in some of the playoff games. So developing a good program, I think, does draw interest from good players. When you look at the SWAT program or some of the field programs out in Saskatoon and Regina now. But for me, the best part of coaching too is watching a group of young men develop into a team. You take a bunch of, I call them, many of them elite players, and getting them to buy into a team first philosophy. That can be challenging at their age. But those guys they were brothers in arms, and their desire to win was exemplary. And looking back now, I'm still, like I said, I'm still good friends with all my players. We share, families, stories, whatever. And those friendships were forged in the heat of the battle, and I think those mean the most to me. It's just the friendships that I made along.
Around the guy from behind, and your stick sort of comes up underneath his chin. A fairly simple way to explain it. There's a shot, score, and just like that, it's 3-1. Long pass up the floor, and a shot in the back. No penalty coming up because of the fact that the player did have the ball, but here's an offensive opportunity. That pass doesn't connect. And Ryan Stewart is called for going back into his own crease with the ball, which of course he cannot do. We'll take another look at that solid check that was delivered. Zones working off the right point, cuts to the middle. Zones with it. He passes it across. A shot, score! What a shot. I believe that was Tyson Hoover that let go with a nice sub shot that found the net over the shoulder of Bennett Bakshishin, and it's now 9-5.